Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to the Utah Story Show. Today on the show, a very exciting program if you like the environment. And I don't think there's anybody in Utah who doesn't like the environment and the natural beauty that we have, especially in our canyons. So on the program is Executive Director of Save Our Canyons, Carl Fisher. And so what we're facing here in Utah and along the Wasatch Front is this population boom. And of course, more and more people want to go into the canyons and go into the pristine wilderness areas that we have. And Carl is faced with the challenge of advising governmental entities and agencies on the best policies that are going to help preserve and protect the wilderness and wildness that we find in our canyons. So the biggest issue is these big, huge developers are coming to Utah. Vail Resorts is now a publicly traded company. They own all of Park City and the canyons. And they want to see this idea called Ski Link or Wasatch Interconnect, which would basically connect all the ski resorts along the Wasatch together, and which would enable them to make more money and have more people on the mountain. This is a terrible idea. There's already way too many people on resorts as it is. And so we talk about the challenges that Save Our Canyons faces and really the environmental movement in Utah in protecting and preserving the last of the wilderness that we still have remaining. So it's a really interesting conversation. I hope you enjoy it. Without further ado, Carl Fisher. All right, Carl, thanks for coming on the Utah Story Show. Appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Appreciate it.
So we just came off of this amazing ski season and all this snow piled up in the mountains. Was this a good year for our canyons? For you guys?
I think from a water perspective, certainly, and it sounds like just reading the papers and talking to some of the folks at the ski resorts, they were pretty happy with visitation and kind of the economic impact of tourism and skiing this year for sure. But I think we got a lot of challenges ahead of us with just how many people we can fit in the Wasatch Mountains and what the impacts are on this place.
Yeah, and just to give people a rundown of Save Our Canyons, is that the most pressing challenge you guys face as your nonprofit? It is just figuring out how to best accommodate all the people that want to be in the canyons and still have it be pristine environment?
Yeah, since we were formed as an organization, our number one concern was the impacts of visitation on the Wasatch. And we've known for quite a long time that people are the greatest impact and threat to the wildness and beauty of the Wasatch, and protecting the wildness and beauty of the Wasatch is our mission statement. So therein lies kind of the crux and the challenges that we face as an organization. But yeah, from protecting wildlife, what do you value up there? We know what our membership values. We think we know what the community values, and it's all about how do we put things in place to make sure that we protect things that are irreplaceable: water quality, wildlife.
Yeah, and I like that you use that word wildness, because what you kind of find is that there's something really special when you get in the Wasatch back pretty far, and the trails get really narrow, and you don't hear the city anymore, and it can only be defined really as wildness. It's just this, like, it feels like a pristine environment that's way better for the deer and the wildlife and everything else that has existed there for forever, and less of an environment for humans. And so I guess that's the major challenge, is how do you both accommodate all the people that want to be up there,
right,
but still keep that balance in place? And is it a lot of what you guys do just fighting against development?
We certainly, I think our first position would be no more development up there, but sometimes that's not the most reasonable or attainable, but that's where we would love to see, just kind of draw a hard line and say nothing past this anymore. We like the idea of kind of an urban growth boundary for this region, where we can live more harmoniously instead of constantly etching away at the wildness of that place, of the Wasatch. So But we oftentimes find ourselves trying to mitigate, the impacts of developments, try and shrink them down. An example is like when Snowbird proposed to build the conference center on top of Hidden Peak. I think it was 100,000 square foot conference center or something like that they proposed. Maybe got approved, and then they got it down to 75,000 square feet. And because of our engagement, it ended up only being like approved for 25,000 square feet. So still a conference center up there, but like the impact is less than half the size that it would have been.
Do you think
there.
though they were shooting for the moon, just knowing that?
You never know. You never know. Like
I didn't know that was approved. 25,000 square foot conference centers being built on Hidden Peak.
Oh yeah, it's up there right now.
You mean the existing? Okay.
Yeah, the new thing that they built up there on top of Hidden Peak a few years back.
They've done a pretty decent job in keeping that.
But yeah, it was supposed to be three times at least, 3 or 4 times the size that it is today. So it's things like that we try to engage on as an organization to try and make sure that I think there are lots of values in the Wasatch. Our members are up there every day, and some of our members maybe have never even been in the Wasatch, but they value the place for the water that they get out of these canyons, right? So our organization kind of runs the gamut of those values that people hold for this place.
Yeah, and when you're running up against these big, massive corporate interest, publicly traded company, Vail Resorts, I mean, they have so much money, and they stand to make and earn so much money by developing the mountains. And do you ever feel like you're a little bit outmatched, like that all their attorneys, all of their PR, they somehow gave Ted Wilson enough money to hire him on?
Right.
Does that feel like a really, really difficult battle, or do you just feel like you have enough of the public support that you guys are able to do it?
It's daunting, but I do feel like we have incredible local support. I think we're fortunate that people, because they've interacted with this landscape and they've seen, whether they're locals that have seen things happen in time over the Wasatch that were, undesirable and something they didn't want to see repeated, they're willing to get proactive and put ordinances in place to help make sure something doesn't happen again. For the people that have moved here, as Utah is growing, we're growing within, but we're also bringing new people to the state. We hear over and over when we're out just talking to people at events throughout the community, whether it's farmers markets and just chatting with people about the Wasatch, they really value, they came here and they're like, man, I lived in California and we didn't get after it and protect. And like, I left California because the reason that I lived there, the values were so compromised that it was no longer my home. And so they move here, also like realizing that that's part of the problem, right? But they do want to be proactive in the solutions because they've loved and lost, and they don't want to repeat that again. So I think we're really fortunate to have a community that really they value recreating, they value skiing, but they also value wildness and beauty and solitude. And the fact that you can still find solitude in these mountains with a sea of over 1 million people immediately adjacent is pretty incredible.
Yeah. And I going back to the Vail Resorts project and how they just keep rebranding their big idea, which is to connect all the resorts through Ski Link or Interconnect.
Yep.
Is that going to just be an ongoing battle? Will they ever just finally give up and realize we want the Wasatch back to stay pristine?
I mean, bad ideas die hard, right? So until we are able to kind of get some conclusion on that proposal and get something firm. Like right now, the Forest Service, public lands say no more ski area expansion. That's part of the plan. That can change by a forest administrator.
That's a national administrator, right?
Yeah, well,
They determines
local
that
administrator from the National Forest Service. Yeah, our local ranger district could, or local forest supervisor could change that, I suppose. They haven't yet, but that's one thing that we have working for us. But the idea of interconnecting the canyons has been around since probably the late 70s. It was one of the first, aside from organizing around stopping snowbird, which was what our organization was founded on.
Oh, really?
The interconnect proposal was probably one of the next big kind of issues. That and the Olympic Games, keeping the Olympic Games out of the Cottonwood Canyons, have kind of been legacy issues for Save Our Canyons since the late 70s.
Huh. So like walk me through your biggest battles. So your very first battle was attempting to stop snowbird?
Yeah, it was this fear of, snowbird. We had ski resorts, of course, all over the Wasatch. One of our board members and founders of the organization, Alexis Kellner, wrote the book on history of skiing in Utah. That's actually what it's called. And he also wrote, the book on ski touring in the Wasatch, backcountry skiing, and showing people how they could link up all of the canyons and do some incredible ski tours in the winter. Winter's a great way to the snow cover allows you to just really explore the Wasatch.
Yeah, I just got into that last year.
Yeah, and it's just amazing. Like, you don't have to bushwhack through things. You just go over the snow, and it's a really incredible experience that we have here. So, yeah, snowbird, fear of that corporate model, fear about how many people can Little Cottonwood Canyon really hold with kind of a very corporate and tourist-based industry like Snowbird was proposing with the condominiums and the restaurants and the tram and things like that. We knew it was going to become like this thing, and the question then, as the question is still today, how many people should we be putting up in this canyon before we fundamentally compromise the integrity of the environment and our watershed? And so I think one of the arguments that Save Our Canyons put forward in 1972 was, can Little Cottonwood Canyon Road and that highway handle the volumes of people that were driving up there? And now, hindsight's 2020, right?
Yeah.
We're looking at these traffic jams, but it's like our
working.
organization kind of called that in the late 70s, that like this is not sustainable.
Yeah.
And so now, we look at fundamentally changing that canyon road, whether we expand the road or do we put things in there to get higher capacities of people up there. So that's been a long time challenge for us. One of the things that we were actually successful in doing in the Central Wasatch was establishing the 3 wilderness areas that we enjoy up in these canyons that have protected those lands. Making sure that those wild characteristics are a driving theme for the management of these areas. So you got the Lone Peak Wilderness, Mount Olympus, and Twin Peaks Wilderness areas. You can't really build or do anything or have motorized, roads or anything in those areas.
White Pine is not one?
White Pine is not. Yeah, we wanted that as part of the Lone Peak Wilderness, but Snowbird fought to keep it out. They own some property on an area we call Pink Pine Ridge because it sits between Red Pine and White Pine. They own some property up there and had some dreams at one point in time of expanding the resort into White Pine Canyon. And we've not only fought to keep those that expansion out of White Pine, but we've even been successful in fighting lifts that would have gone up just to the ridge line of White Pine from the Gad Valley, which is Snowbird's western kind of extent in Little Cottonwood Canyon. So, and also trying to keep stuff off of Mount Superior when Snowbird tried to propose a roller coaster up there a couple years ago. And
gosh, I don't hear about these proposals. I guess That's what's great about you guys. You get wind of them early on.
We try to, be on top of a lot of things. So, at one point in time, there was, I guess we have 6 ski areas in the central Wasatch now. There was 7, but when the Canyons Park City Mountain, merger happened, we ended up with, the 6 ski resorts. So 2 in Park City, Vail and Deer Valley, and then the 4 in the Cottonwood Canyons that we're constantly keeping on top of. And that's we watch those, but then there's also lots of cabins and developments and things like that are taking place in these canyons where people are knocking down historic cabins and trying to build big mansions and stuff up there.
Yeah.
So the uses and the pressures are changing. As our valley and our population changes as well.
And is that just an ongoing battle to prevent more mansions from going up in closer and closer to wilderness?
Yeah, I mean, we're trying to protect not only the landscape up there, but certainly waterways and things like that. We don't want to have people building on wetlands. We would say that the canyons are probably built out. Surveys that have been done by Salt Lake County over the years, people are saying that, they don't want to see any more development, and there's certainly a segment of people that would like to see less development than already exists up there. Mm-hmm. And so we haven't been in the business of trying to take things away up there that people already have, but certainly trying to prevent additional encroachments and developments, roads, ski area expansions, and just be more thoughtful about what we want and what we stand to lose up there from all of these activities. I mean, whether we're talking about trails and parking lots and trailheads, these things all have a huge impact, and we just want it to be thoughtful, not just like, wouldn't it be cool if? And it's like, let's think about, both the cool, but like, what are the costs as well?
Yeah. So going back to the problem with the Little Cottonwood Canyon, I know that last year wait times were sometimes hours and hours to get up to the ski resorts. It seems like, as you said, there has to be a new method of getting people up there. Mm-hmm. What is your feeling? Like, what direction is it going to do actually a road widening, or to have a transport system in place, or what do you think is going to happen up there?
Oh, man, what I think is going to happen, I mean, I guess I would say what I hope doesn't happen. Sure. I hope we don't. I think we can use existing infrastructure more wisely to solve the problem. Mm-hmm. I don't think we need to widen roads. I don't think we need to do big construction or big engineering projects up there. I really do think that we can solve some of the issues that we're having up there.
You think a big parking lot maybe down at the bottom of the canyon, big, like expanding that as a double decker, or?
I think several park and ride lots throughout the valley is absolutely needed to help service, people going up and down the canyons. Mm-hmm. But I think in the perfect world, having transit lines in the valley connecting to canyon routes year round, where people, I think we have some minor engineering problems in the canyon. I think that the toughest nut to crack in the canyons, we're facing a massive behavioral issue with people in these canyons, and we have to change our behaviors in order to protect the environment. Otherwise,
everybody wants to drive their own car.
Everybody wants to drive their own car. So, I mean, do you want the canyons to turn into a massive parking lot, or do you value the wildness up there? And the flat areas, are getting more and more expensive. And honestly, most of the flat areas are in stream corridors and wetlands up there, which, we could start seeing huge impacts, not only to wildlife, but to our drinking water quality. If we start paving over these, wetlands and destroying the natural systems that help purify some of our water.
Yeah. So looking at this sort of debate a little closer,
Yeah.
who are the interests involved here? Like what are the big parties and what do they want?
Sure. So I think the state. Little Cottonwood Canyon in particular. I mean, we look at the Central Wasatch as a unit. So part of what UDOT is looking at with this Little Cottonwood EIS, we think it's a little short-sighted because we don't think you can look at Little Cottonwood Canyon without looking at Big Cottonwood Canyon because they're kind of a system. And part of why we say that was in part because of what we saw happen a couple of years ago. UDOT did avalanche. They changed their avalanche control and road closure program in Little Cottonwood Canyon, and they basically started closing Little Cottonwood Canyon overnight to any traffic because people were camping and like sleeping up there to beat the road closures so that they could go dawn patrol, right? But what we also saw happen was that people shifted their behaviors from using Little Cottonwood Canyon because the closures were just happening, and we saw an influx of people going over to Big Cottonwood Canyon. So when you change something with Little Cottonwood Canyon, people will just go to Big Cottonwood Canyon. So like that's why we feel like you really got to address these canyons. They're different canyons, of course. They have some different uses and things like that. They have different challenges along the road corridors, but you do have to treat them both. You have to look at them both. So looking at Little Cottonwood is a little bit of a disservice, but the state's a huge player. The ski industry is a big player. I think other recreational interests, environmental interests, watershed.
So as far as like
interests.
what the state wants, does it feel like they have a specific plan that they want or that they're pushing for, or are they pretty much like wanting to let the political process play out however it does?
I think I really believe, and we've tried to work with UDOT on some of this stuff, but it's kind of like when you're a hammer, everything's a nail. And when you're UDOT, who has since its inception basically been expanding highways to accommodate more single occupant vehicles, like that's what the output always has been. So we thought that they would maybe be treating this project a little bit differently. But because it's UDOT and not UTA, it's becoming more of a roadway project than it is a transit project.
Oh, really?
And so that's, I think, probably one of our biggest frustrations with the little Cottonwood project.
Why is it more UDOT than UTA?
Well, I think there's a lot there. I think part of it has been UTA lost all public trust, a couple years ago.
Yeah.
With things that were going on in the agency, and then the agency was literally dismantled and reassembled by the legislature. So it's just not. It hasn't been maybe firing on all cylinders as an agency. Let's just say it's had some challenges just institutionally as an entity. And so I think UDOT was probably more prepared to handle this, but that was our fear going in, because for 30 plus years, since like the late 80s, we've said we need more buses, we need more transit in these canyons, right? It's been like unanimous. And then UDOT basically comes out with its EIS a couple months ago and says, we're going to look at building a third lane up there. And it's like, what? Why would you buck 30 years of like unanimity in studies saying we need more transit up in these canyons? We need to get people out of their cars. But they're looking at, making new parking lots, expanding White Pine parking lot to like something like 150 stall parking lot. We're like, well, we'll close the roadside parking. It's like, no, close the roadside parking and keep the tiny parking lot and try and service this and manage it with transit as opposed to accommodating more vehicles.
So it sounds like it's just like an organizational deficiency. UDOT is not designed to be looking at transit solutions. They're only really designed to be looking at how do we accommodate more vehicles. And UTA is really not into not taking a big enough role here to
I think that's part of it. I mean, I think UDOT looks at things not just capacity and kind of, they have all of these standards for roadways that they need to meet. But they're looking at safety. I mean, they manage the avalanches and stuff like that in the canyon too. So they're looking at it through numerous lenses. Mm-hmm. But one of the studies we like to point to that UDOT did in 2006 basically said, there's this metric called the Avalanche Hazard Index for Little Cottonwood Canyon, and it's been called one of the most dangerous highways in North America. So Avalanche Hazard Index is basically the time a vehicle is in danger of an avalanche slide path, right? And there's there's a couple dozen going up Little Cottonwood Canyon. That's why they shut the canyon down, right? To let those avalanches down in the winter. So the longer a car is underneath that path, the higher the avalanche hazard index, right? So flowing traffic, you're under there for a fraction of a second, right? And so the avalanche hazard, it's there because you're crossing multiple, but when the road stops and when there's a traffic jam and people are sitting underneath avalanche paths like a string of cars for 3, 4, 5, 8 hours, the avalanche hazard index goes through the roof, right? So, and they're looking at that metric, but what we say is like, well, it's not the avalanches, because avalanches are what shaped these canyons. Like they're the thing that we're afraid of, but it's the cars that are the problem. And so if we can get enough cars off the roadway to the point where the cars aren't stopped on the highway, the avalanche index, we drive that number down significantly. If we just have free-flowing traffic up there, we can be in good shape. And some people have analyzed that something as simple as like a 20 or 30% reduction in the number of cars would get you back to that free-flowing traffic point on that highway. And if every person in Little Cottonwood Canyon, vehicular occupancy in that canyon is about 1.2 people per car. So simply by doubling the number of people in each vehicle, you could take half the cars off the road.
Wow.
Right? Yeah. And so if you get those people on buses as well, you can drive that number way down, and it should be attainable.
Yeah, as far as transit goes, I just think it's always a matter of comfort and convenience.
Yeah.
It's like those are the two problems you got to solve. And unfortunately, like...
And cost.
And cost being a factor too. But it's like... I skied with my grandpa up at Snowbird for 18 years, and he had a little, he had a whole routine where, this is crazy, but he had a little bar in his trunk, and he'd always have a cocktail after we skied.
Of course.
And then he'd just sit and relax, and we talk to people. It's like we talk to people in the parking lot. He'd offer them a drink too, and not that anybody should be doing that. But it was
it's
like
a social. It's kind of the social aspect of the activity of skiing.
Yeah, it was just
right?
Having a beer, having a drink after you skied. It was a nice thing, and I think people are just so in love with their car and being able to keep everything in it. Looking around the nation or around the world, are there some solutions to other places where they've come up with where they're getting enough buy-in for transit for people to just really, be like, yeah, this is great.
Yeah, people have talked about, areas in like the Alps, right, where you have in Switzerland where you have basically these carless communities, right, and everybody just comes up for the day and but there are no cars anywhere in the resort area, and whether they're serviced by a train or a gondola, whatever, like that's an idea.
It seems like
but
a train might be a better idea, or something like a Trax.
Yeah,
it seems to be a little more comfortable than buses.
But I think the idea of having, so one thing is if the resorts don't have to have so many parking lots for cars because people aren't using their cars. There's a lot of other things that they could do to help, whether it's like, transit centers where there are lockers that you can rent for a week or a month or a season, right? And you just keep your ski stuff up in that locker. If you're going to Snowbird, that works. If the new passes that come out, like the Icon passes and stuff like that, and the Epic passes that allow you to bounce around resorts, that locker idea might not work so well, right? Because then maybe you got to have a pair of skis at every single resort that you get. Anyways,
Yeah.
You're saving money on the pass, so you can buy more skis, right?
Yeah.
But yeah, those types of things have come up, like, to allow that. But I hear you. It's like I try to think. I got two young kids, something that I didn't appreciate when I was, skiing in college and going up to these places, how easy it was just to jump on the bus. But now, like, carrying a 6-year-old girl's and a 3-year-old girl's skis and, like, all the bananas and the peanut butter and jelly sandwiches and stuff like that. Because, it certainly would, it could make things tricky. But that's what I'm saying. I guess when I say we have a behavioral issue, and I think those are the types of things that we can engineer around with a transit-based kind of system at the resorts. But yeah, whether it's lockers, but yeah, people do use their cars as lockers right now. And we hear that a lot, it's like, your grandpa had a cooler. People are rolling up there with like full-on grills and stuff like that now, right? And just like grilling burgers and hot dogs in the parking lot afterwards. And that's kind of the social. It's a nice sunny winter's day up in the mountains. It's all that crud in the valley because the air quality's gone to hell. And
just need bars.
Yeah, a nice little wet bar at the back of the bus.
But well, right, like that's the idea. So you look at these so different ideas. Buses, so I feel like you could solve the problem with buses. The one thing, the challenge with the buses is, like, so if the ski area, they fire up their lifts at 8:30 or 9 o'clock, right? And like people especially on like a good snow day, right? Like people want that first chair. So you got however many people in the Salt Lake, couple, tens of thousands of people trying to get to that first chair. It's like, that's your traffic jam. Like if people were that eager to get to work every day on I-15, like it would be a cluster out there every single day, right? But it's like work isn't a powder day. So, that's something that people seek. So, but everybody's after it. So you just like, how do you meet that demand? And I think the other question is, should we be meeting that demand?
Yeah, my solution was I stopped going to resorts on Saturday and Sunday.
Right.
I just I go there for the solitude and the pristine environment. I don't go to see giant crowds of people.
And so that's a behavioral shift, right? And people will change their behaviors in order to get the experience that they want. But there could be a time where it's just like, Sunday through Monday, as people's work schedules and stuff like that get more flexible, or they're able to finagle that into something that's important for their lifestyle. We could see that impact, all throughout the week. But I was talking to Snowbird about some stuff in the canyons the other day, and they were like, well, other resorts I can't remember, is it Eldora Resort in Colorado? They're kind of off the I-70, kind of close to Boulder area. They basically priced like a 12 or 12:30, start pass at half the price or better than their 9 a.m. kind of pass. And what they saw is that did help kind of distribute the peak and make it so that the roadway wasn't failing. So like, maybe you can't get up there right at 9 o'clock, but like an afternoon session, works for you in your schedule. So there are things that they can do to incentivize and have different behaviors and make that activity accessible to more people, I think.
Yeah. And I know the talk about a toll road really rubbed a lot of people the wrong way, but is that still on the table? Is it?
I think, tolling, we think tolling absolutely needs to be part of it.
I just think if you really want to control behavior, there's really no better way to do it than a toll road. As much as I don't like toll roads,
Yeah.
it's like if there's a peak time
Yeah.
and the toll is pretty expensive,
Exactly.
you can
Normalizing. Yeah, we got to figure out. So there's not a silver bullet, but there's lots of things that we need to implement. And I think better transit, better buses, better accessibility. The canyons, I mean, so it's basically the Forest Service and Salt Lake City watershed that are the primary kind of funders of things that go on in the stewardship of the canyons, right? And so the Forest Service's budget has like just been getting slashed since the 80s, right? And most of their monies now goes to fighting fires. So like stewardship of these areas, there's not a steady funding stream to help do projects up there. So tolling helps not only generate a little bit of revenue up there, but it also can, as you pointed out, change behaviors, right? Because we can not only price people at peak times to help incentivize better behavior, like carpooling or using transit. Because remember, we're talking 1.2 people per car in that canyon, right? That's basically one person per vehicle. If we can, and if you get charged just if it's $20 for one person to drive their car for a single occupant, but it's $10 for two people, and $5 for three, and if you have four, it's free. And then that revenue goes to help drive down the cost of riding the bus. So it might be, maybe we get it to $1 or free to ride transit. Then, we want to be sensitive to some of those environmental justice type issues and pricing people out of the canyons. That's not the intent. So if you have a free transit option, you can, in Park City, right? They have free buses up there. It's not something that is totally unrealistic.
Yeah, I think that's a great idea.
But yeah, you have to have the transit and the toll in place. Like it's you have to have at least those two things.
So how do you communicate that message to UDOT and get on the same page with them?
Well, they seem to be being more receptive to the tolling side of things. I think honestly, at the end of the day, UDOT works for the people of Utah. So if the people of Utah demand it, they should be responsive to it. And that's kind of, I think, where we're at in this campaign right now, is that people need to get involved. Comment period for that Little Cottonwood Canyon EIS just closed for the scoping, but there will be a number of other ways and opportunities to provide input. But this initial one was to kind of set the tone of and get all the ideas out on the table, to see what we should be doing to solve problems in Little Cottonwood Canyon. But they are looking at third lanes. They are looking at gondolas. They might be looking at trains and stuff like that. And I think we should look at all of the options. And I think there are trade-offs for all of these things. But at the end of the day, I think it's going to take a long. Trains are expensive. Gondolas are controversial. The easiest, quickest thing to do, and that requires like little, if any, modification of the roadway, would just to be get more buses, run them year round, and start training people to embrace transit.
Yeah. And how's the public involvement been? Has it been? Have people started to get involved enough about what's going on up there? It seems like it only really reaches a peak when we realize that this is going to happen unless we get involved.
People are not terribly proactive is one thing I've learned in this work over the years. When we want to stop something and like something seems like it's happening, people will come out with torches and pitchforks. But when there's an opportunity to be proactive and make something happen, not responding to something that's a threat, people are a little lazier coming to the table, so to speak, just because they don't sense the urgency, I guess.
I remember that stop ski link sign with the tree getting cut off. That was just super effective. And I just see those in people's yards. And I'm like, hell no, I don't want ski link. Because I mean, if you've ever ridden the Wasatch Crest Trail on your mountain bike, it's just absolutely incredible. Just totally pristine and beautiful, and to just like turn that into a road that can accommodate semi trucks and diggers and giant massive, machines that can widen everything and develop it, that's just a terrible idea.
And when you're right there, kind of at the crux of the crest, looking at the spine, right? And you can look into Park City. You have this, like, you're right on the ridge there, and you have this juxtaposition of what's on the Big Cottonwood side versus what's happened, up in like White Pine Canyon and the Colony up in Park City, right? And it's just like, man, I really value what we have over here, and I'm terrified of what might be coming over the ridge.
Yeah.
And so I agree. Like, people got engaged in that. We were successful, but now, we beat Ski Link, and then Ski Utah pushed out its One Wasatch thing, which we call just Ski Link on steroids, right? Because now instead of just linking two resorts, they want to link them all together.
Yeah. And then they compared it to what they've got in the Alps.
Right.
But the Alps, I think if I read, is something like, I can't say the number, but something like 20 million square miles or acres.
Yeah, it's huge.
And this is like 135 square acres, something like that.
Yes.
Do you know those numbers?
So we've been working on trying to protect all the public lands in the Central Wasatch through an act of Congress, basically prohibiting ski area expansion and providing more protections for the land, and having a more thoughtfully planned kind of recreation experience and trailheads and bathrooms, and where do we put those things in transit, right? Mm-hmm. Trying to forge this new plan for the Wasatch to help sustain it better, and particularly looking at the public lands. I've lost my train of thought there on what were we just chatting about?
I was trying to make the point that the Alps are such a massive, expansive amount of area, and comparing that to the Wasatch Range, it's way, way smaller, and there's so much less land that we can mutilate in the Wasatch back than what they compared us to with the interconnect they have in the Alps.
So from basically from Parley's Canyon to Little Cottonwood Ridgeline, and from basically Wasatch Boulevard in Salt Lake to the Wasatch Crest Trail, just kind of that area of the Central Wasatch is about 80,000 acres of public land. Mm-hmm. That's not very much.
No,
and we get over about 6 million visits to that area annually. It's more than a lot of our national parks, and a fraction the size of our national parks as well. So you could fit the Wasatch. I think it's something like 15 or 20 times or more inside kind of the Switzerland, the Swiss Alps model. Mm-hmm. I think there is some like ski touring that's oftentimes required, and I would say their ski tours are probably longer than the ski tours that we do in the Wasatch. Mm-hmm. So this area is incredibly compact. There's already a lot of infrastructure and roads and amenities in these mountains in comparison to the I bet the population in Big Cottonwood Canyon is greater than the population of a lot of those areas in the Alps as well.
And I think it's like examining the law of diminishing returns. Like, it's great we have the 6 million visitors that we've got. That's wonderful. All the good it does for our economy, and all the good the supplementary businesses who accommodate them. But you're going to reach a point where, okay, we want to accommodate 12 million. Well, what is that going to look like, and how is that going to impact our quality of life?
And
and who is really going to greatly benefit from it? It's, Vail Resorts, that's a publicly traded company, and I think even if you're a shareholder of Vail, you've got to think about, okay, once pristine land is paved over, or you just decide to go up there and develop it, there's no like bringing it back.
There's no going
There's no
back.
like, oh, whoops, we made a mistake 100 years ago. Now we're gonna somehow bring it. There's no bringing it back. An ecosystem is a pretty fragile thing, right?
And we made a lot of mistakes 100 years ago, and we're still paying for the mining legacy up in these canyons, right? So,
Yeah.
I mean, yeah, we have concrete examples of things that we've done up there that we're still trying to walk back and repair and things like that. But
And
I think that your point is that, so if the Cottonwood resorts, let's just say they had 3 million visits this year, right? And we know what 3 million visits now in retrospect looks like in the Cottonwood Canyons. Do we want more than that?
Yeah.
Right? Because if we want more than that, when we get 3 million visits at the ski areas, the cafeterias are all full at the ski areas, right? The road is dangerous and unsustainable. The parking lots are also, we're not looking at just surface parking, but potentially do we want to see parking garages inside the canyons to accommodate more vehicles? We could want to continue to grow the ski industry, but there are costs associated with that. More pavement, more development, more condos, more restaurants in these canyon environments. And I think we might want to get to the resort more efficiently and things like that, but there are trade-offs with all of these things. And so that's kind of the conversation we're trying to force. And get codified once and for all and because we've been asking the question for 30 years and getting the same answer, but there's not the political will to follow it up with something conclusive. And that's our frustration right now, is saying we need to do this once and for all. Otherwise, we need to do what we want. Otherwise, the change is going to happen to us, and it's going to manifest itself in a pretty undesirable way. That you got to get a handle on it, and you got to get ahead of it. Right.
Otherwise, you're just going to be living to regret it. And we were in the UK for a while, and everybody in the UK regrets that during the Industrial Revolution they basically decimated all of their old growth forests. There's no more old growth forest at all in the entire UK. And they're just like, yeah, we really screwed up, and we're never getting that back.
Yeah.
And so all we have are these tree farms that we pretend to kind of resemble forests, but it's nowhere near the amount of ecological diversity that you find in a pristine old growth forest. And so it's just like, I don't think that we want to go there.
When we've been there here. The interesting thing to me, just like looking at public lands and land management issues in Utah, where it's just like, it seems like we come up with the craziest ideas and pursue them on a daily basis in the state of Utah. I mean, the Wasatch Cache National Forest was established because the Mormon pioneers essentially mined and logged every square inch of the Wasatch Mountains to the point where the water was undrinkable, and they were experiencing landslides. And the state of Utah in 1900 asked the federal government to establish forest reserves because the Utahns were not able to manage the land.
No kidding.
And so, like, you look at that 100 years later, in the face of this kind of neo-sagebrush, take back Utah's lands kind of thing, where we want to get rid of the federal government. It's like, man, we're totally turning history on its face and going the opposite direction. Like, we've had 100 years of stewardship from that time, and we're on a good trajectory. The land is healing, the land is repairing itself, and now we want to give the state control of these places again. It just seems
who were
like
the foresighted leaders who asked the federal government to protect those lands? Do you know?
mean, it was Senator Smoot.
Oh, no kidding.
Yeah, was one of the drivers. But
because I heard that story from a national or a forest ranger who was in charge of antiquities, or he told me that there weren't any trees in
Yeah.
Little Cottonwood Canyon
Correct.
100 years ago.
Spruce's campground in Big Cottonwood Canyon was the USDA and Civilian Conservation Corps tree farm for the cottonwoods, where they grew and hand planted a lot of the trees that you see in the Wasatch today.
Wow.
They grew all of those trees, so we don't have old growth forests here. But we planted more trees because it destroyed our water quality.
Yeah.
And so,
So
human
that diverse
activity-
habitat that you see there, that's only thanks to
Restored.
100 years of preservation, but it's not probably what it was, before they
No.
chopped it all down.
not what it was before. Yeah, chopped it all down. But I just find that interesting, as we look at all this stuff. We had intensive uses in the Wasatch, and it didn't bode well
Yeah.
for the landscape or the community.
Mhm.
And now it seems like we have this kind of new intensive uses that we want to introduce into this landscape while we ignore the impacts of the past. And the impacts might not be the same, but to say that there won't be impacts from connecting ski areas or widening roads or driving more or having like just this insane kind of tourism and visitation patterns that we want to drive up into these canyons, to say that they won't have impacts is, I think, one, false, and two, short-sighted.
Yeah. We'll take a little break, and when we get back, we'll kind of zoom out a little more and talk a little more about the overall environmental movement right now, and how to look at what's going to become a much bigger city in Salt Lake City and the Wasatch Front, and how to best deal with that. All right, on today's Utah Trails Report, we visit the Salt Lake Overlook Trail and beyond. So the Salt Lake Overlook Trail is one of the most well-traveled trails in Mill Creek Canyon. I absolutely love it, but I love going the back route, and by that I mean going up Thanes Canyon and then looping around where you can connect to the trail beyond the Salt Lake Overlook Trail. And this is my favorite spot of the trail, where you have this expansive view of the pines and you're up against the mountain mahogany trees. They are my favorite trees in the Wasatch Front. They're these trees that only grow up in the rocks. And as you can see from this sort of panoramic view, it's just a stunning view. And if you're into sort of more heavy exercise and a lot of vertical feet, this is the place to go. It's a strenuous hike, but it is well worth it. If you've got, 4 hours, you can walk it the whole time. If you want to run it where it's, flat or either downhill, you can actually do it in about an hour and a half. And I did this to train for the Wasatch back, and it's a great workout, and the dogs love it, so I'd highly recommend it. So we're back, and I wanted to talk about the whole issue of accessibility to the wilderness, that like taking a bigger view at this, because what I kind of see happens with the ski industry is that it's become much more of a rich man's sport, where
Golf.
where you need all this gear, and that's not prohibitive. You can find cheap gear at the DI or whatever, but then then these epic passes come around, and then a lot of people can afford, $500 or whatever it was last year. But then you're still dealing with this deal where you got to pay more to go on the weekends, and if you really want to get the fresh powder, you've got to leave early, and then you need to you can are there special passes for certain peak hours? Did they ever do that? Like there used to be a black pass at Snowbird where you could cut lines to get the fresh powder.
Oh yeah, I don't know. Yeah,
don't know if
maybe.
they-
Yeah, I mean, there's certain. I know they have a lot of different products at all the ski areas, and
But I hate the idea that something like accessing the wilderness becomes much more easy if you've got a ton of money.
right.
And so when we're looking at all this population growth that we're having, and you're looking at accessibility and the trends, how is it that you can be a poor college student and still enjoy the wilderness? Do you see that
Getting out.
diminishing in the future as our population increases, or are there any good solutions to that problem?
Well, I mean, in the absence, I think, I mean, what we know about the kind of some of the different demographics is that, yeah, younger people and students, generally people with less money, are using transit more to get around. A lot of them don't even have automobiles, right?
Mhm.
So when we're catering to private automobiles instead of transit, we are kind of, I guess, going down the path of making, you know, the mountains kind of the rich man's place, right?
Yeah.
And I think that's absolutely a problem, and something we have to pay attention to for sure.
Yeah, and off air we were talking about the idea of expanding ride sharing to both public unused parking lots such as churches and schools, and also using apps to just get people who have their SUVs to take on a couple more passengers.
And potentially with that toll, get around the price of the toll, right? You have an incentive to get more people in your car to get around the fee.
I think I think those are awesome ideas, and I think if they're actually implemented, then it would be proof that the elitist and big corporations aren't the ones actually running things.
Yeah.
Because what we find so much in our coverage is that the best solution is not the solution that's implemented, because the people who are pulling the strings are the ones who have the moneyed interest and the vested interest in keeping it, you know, more accessible and easier for the money aspect, the people who are going to spend a lot more on lunch, who are going to be willing to pay more for their ticket, their lift ticket.
We base a lot of our decisions off of economic impact rather than social impact, right? Because I don't always think that economic decisions are in the best interest of our society.
Yeah, that's what's great about you guys. I mean,
fundamentally. So I do think, you know, the Wasatch has always been kind of this place where our community comes together, and it was interesting when we did our user survey. You know, we talk a lot about wildness and solitude, and that's definitely a value that we hold. However, when we did our user survey, what we found, we asked people, like, did you encounter people on your outing today? And we interviewed people for a full calendar year at like 40 different locations throughout the Wasatch: winter, summer, spring, fall. And what we found unanimously across those seasons was that while people's motivation for getting out was like wild, solitude, quiet, peace, tranquility were kind of some of the words they used. When we asked them about, like, did you interact with anybody else on your trip? And they're like, yeah, we probably saw a dozen or more people, you know, varied. And we're like, did that negatively impact your experience, or did it positively, or was it like neutral? And most people said that it was a positive enhancement. So we're out there for solitude, but we also realize that, like, we live in a society and like other people are out there trying to get whatever it is they're out there for, whether it's an endorphin rush or
and it's a big difference.
It's cool
between encountering somebody on a city street where they're in a hurry and they're stressed,
right,
and when you encounter somebody in the mountains and they're just happy,
and
it's just great.
So like that, to me, that's cool, and I think we need to absolutely make sure that we're not, I mean, the money that is going to be made off of the Wasatch Mountains shouldn't be from things that are built that take away from somebody else's what they're after up there. I think we can do things in our communities and at the bases of these canyons to have some economic development surrounding those, but let's not do things in these canyons that diminish that experience that can't be replaced.
Yeah,
because then
the
it's
whole point is to get away,
Yeah.
to not hear the city anymore, to get away from development and see
And-
God's creation, not
and
man's creations.
that's the thing. That's what we're trying to get to, and that's what we're fearful of with all of these ideas, is that there's people that want to do things up there to essentially make money, and I think it's going to come at the cost for all of us. And at the end of the day, that's just going to make this place that less kind of cool.
Yeah.
I think it will have broader impacts to lose what we have up there for this community, because just like the people that I've met tabling from Washington, California, anywhere, Denver, like that are like, man, we lost what you guys have here. Like they moved away because they lost it. And I feel like, people in Utah like to keep the locals around because we have that culture, we have that kind of tight knit fabric to our community, and I think it could stand to be lost if we lose the Wasatch.
Yeah, be a terrible thing. And we talked mostly about Little and Big Cottonwood Canyon, but of course Mill Creek Canyon and Immigration Canyon, they all have their own issues. And I mean, as far as where I go most of the time, Mill Creek Canyon, I've seen just in the last 5 years, it seems like a doubling of the number of people up there.
Right.
And you would think that it might be a negative, but like I said, if everybody's up there and they're obeying the rules, they're staying on the trail, and trails look nice, and they're all just happy.
Picking up after their dog, using the bathrooms.
Yeah, clean up after your dog. That's a big one.
Yeah.
When I see dog poop and I'm cleaning up after my dogs constantly, it just really bugs me. Should be the last thing you'd ever do is
I know,
not clean up after your dog.
Yeah,
because
sure.
Mill Creek, you're so lucky to be able to bring your dogs up there.
Super lucky, yeah. And that's the thing that we also try to hit. I'm glad you said lucky, because I think a lot of people, maybe not a lot of people, but certainly some people, view what we have in the Wasatch as a right or an entitlement, and it's a privilege.
Oh yeah.
The amount of access. So I mean, this is the watershed for almost 1 million people in the Salt Lake area, and even in the Park City area, people get their water from these mountains. Most watersheds of that magnitude are prohibited to human entry.
Wow, really?
Because they're so sensitive. Because the value of water transcends all other values, right? Because we need water for life.
Yeah.
So there would be no skiing without us having clean drinking water, right?
Yeah.
So I think that's why I like to also remind people that what we have up there is a privilege, and it's a privilege that we need to steward if we want to continue enjoying these places. But I think it was in the 50s, water quality, primarily because of grazing activity in City Creek Canyon. City Creek Canyon was closed to all human entry for like a period of almost, I think it was 20 years.
No way.
And so that was just as recent as the 50s, right? When the population in Salt Lake was like nil, right? So that's something that we should also be, if these are watersheds that our economy is ingrained in having clean, affordable drinking water. If we ruin that, there could be some real big problems down.
I kind of wonder, so I love riding with my dogs.
Yeah.
And anybody who follows us on Instagram can see that. But we go up to City Creek, and then it just says dogs prohibited past this point. And I so want to just go there because I could go, all the way up the canyon. And so what is the big reasoning behind that? Like, if I'm cleaning up after my dogs and all they're doing is peeing once in a while, probably not at all because they already peed down below. Why is that so bad?
Great question. wild animals and domesticated animals fall into kind of two different categories. So domesticated animals carry diseases because they live basically hand in hand with humans, or hand in paw with humans. We can share, contaminants, and we can get sick from them, essentially, right? And dog, I think both urine and feces has coliform bacteria, E. coli, things of that nature in it. And our water treatment plants our water system is actually pretty fascinating. It's a little bit of like, it's an engineering kind of marvel, I think, because the water, we don't have to pay money to pump our water. It's all gravity fed in the Salt Lake Valley for the most part.
Wow.
Based off of the flows that they capture from the canyons. And the water filters that we have in City Creek and in the Mouthful Big and Little Cottonwood Canyon, they're essentially like a charcoal filter, big charcoal filter that the water just trickles through and gets filtered out. We have
naturally or at the treatment facilities?
At the treatment facilities,
Okay.
but we have such high quality water that the treatment is pretty minimal, and the plants were designed that way. And so now, as we see more pressures and more contamination, could we have dogs up there? Yeah, but we'd probably have to build a new treatment plant because they're not set up to treat for kind of that coliform bacteria levels.
Okay.
We have
Makes
to
sense.
actually make behavioral changes.
I figured there
help.
had to be a pretty good reason.
But you're able to go up to the point where the water starts going into the treatment plant.
Yeah.
And below that, they allow it to be open. So
Yeah, I just did the Wasatch steeplechase,
wow.
and it's so incredible because you go way back until you actually can see the Wasatch back, and you're on Black Mountain, and then you come down this beautiful forest area. But then above the treatment facility, I was amazed. The water level and the river is so huge.
Yeah.
And that treatment facility, all the water after it's probably half the size. Like we're
pulling a fair amount of water.
A lot of water.
Yeah.
And I guess most of that just gets quickly treated and then just taken right into the customers. The system. And is it a lot? Do you happen to know? Is it a lot that they don't use that ends up in the Great Salt Lake, or is it everything that goes through there they actually use?
I don't know the numbers off the top of my head, but you can look at those numbers in the Salt Lake City Department of Public Utilities kind of watershed plan and report. They have a lot of those numbers in there.
Yeah, it's interesting once you get into it.
For sure. Yeah, so I mean, water's a huge value up there, and I think it's one that needs to be protected. But yeah, the wild animals up there, we always get like, well, I seen moose poop in the streams, and why can't my dog poop in the stream? And it's like, well, the wild animals and domesticated animals are different from a public health standpoint. So
that makes sense.
Yeah.
Well, and so the last question is, as the population of Salt Lake grows, it's like the whole Wasatch Front is growing so quickly. Is there an overall master plan for the canyons and the development and how to maintain the quality of life we enjoy here?
So there has been a master plan. It was written in 1989, and there have probably been 2 or 3 dozen or more studies and kind of analysis and plans since that time. And I should say the Salt Lake County Master Plan is really looking at things within the county's jurisdiction. Then we have a U.S. Forest Service plan, right? So every jurisdiction has their own kind of plan. And what we've often said is that there's easily 2 dozen jurisdictions in the Wasatch, right? And it's like every time a community wants to incorporate its own city, right? Then they get certain kind of planning abilities, and maybe what Mill Creek wants is different than what Holiday or Cottonwood Heights wants, and like what Sandy wants is maybe different than what was in the Canyon's master plan, right?
That gets complicated.
And it gets really complicated. So, and so what I look at, and maybe the analogy I use when I talk to people about this is, we have this kind of political patchwork of jurisdictions all over the Wasatch.
Mm-hmm.
But at the end of the day, the Wasatch is a landscape, and it's not unlike a quilt.
Mm-hmm.
Going back to Utah's pioneer heritage, right? Quilting.
Mm-hmm.
A quilt is basically this beautiful thing that's comprised of a bunch of different patches and designs, right? And I believe, just like with quilts in the Wasatch, if all of our patchy political jurisdictions can work together to make sure that this quilt of the Wasatch is beautiful for generations to come, we're going to be in a good place. But if one person that has their patch next to another patch, they don't want to talk to each other, and we just kind of let's see what happens, that quilt might be kind of ugly at the end of the day, and not desirable.
Yeah.
And so that's what we're trying to prevent. We're trying to get everybody's plans to align. We're trying to get everybody's values to align. And we've done that. We've done that through the Mountain Accord process a couple of years ago. One of the recommendations, and this recommendation was also in 1989 Wasatch Plan, to kind of have an intergovernmental entity help facilitate those conversations for the Wasatch. And so that came about. There's an entity called the Central Wasatch Commission. And of course, because they're looking at land use and public lands and, kind of an ecological unit, it's been it's been a political football in the state, and particularly up at the state legislature. But I mean, it came into existence in 2016 or 2017.
Is it comprised of members of the state legislature?
So it's comprised of local jurisdictions in the Central Wasatch. So Salt Lake City, Salt Lake County, Cottonwood Heights.
So they send a representative.
Yeah. So every political jurisdiction's council, city council or county council, codified this agreement to create this thing and appointed a person from their entity to represent them on it. So sometimes it's the mayor, sometimes it's a council member. But they're kind of this new planning entity. And this is how hard and slow work in the Wasatch. That was recommended in 1989. It didn't come into existence until 2016.
Jeez.
And that is how slowly and how controversial looking at all of these ideas, whether we're talking about land use and zoning, public lands management, transportation, all of these things are wrapped up into this. But, we've been creating municipalities faster than we've been able to kind of congeal around a vision for the future.
It's just kind of too bad that the I don't know, that the Forest Service doesn't have a mechanism in place where they can just all kind of convene all of the different municipalities together and just say, we will mediate this discussion and maybe use you guys as well, and you can come and bring somebody or not. But it just anyway, I guess that's always the problem.
They kind of do, but the problem is that the Forest Service can do it, but they can't do it with the purview of any lands that aren't public lands. So when you drive up the, Little Cottonwood Canyon, you probably drive through a dozen different political jurisdictions. You don't know that, right? Water flowing down from Cardiff Fork in Big Cottonwood Canyon probably crosses another 12 different political jurisdictions.
No kidding.
Right? But as a hiker, as a drop of water, as a moose or an elk in the Wasatch, these lines are arbitrary and political, right? At the end of the day, like, you're going to take the line on your bike that you feel confident in doing, that has like great, that gives you what you want, whether it's thrills or beauty, right? If you're a skier, or a snowboarder, you're gonna take the line that either drops the cliff or like goes towards that powder stash, right? You're not paying attention to these invisible lines
what political
that we created,
jurisdictions, like
whether it's forest, whether it's public or private ground.
So there's a lot of private ground as you're going up both those
that's
canyons.
part of the quilt.
Yeah, I know
sure.
that the LDS Church has their archives in the back and buried in the granite cliff wall there.
And some property owners up in the canyons are totally want, everything to be protected. Others are trying to hedge their bets on what might come down the line and where they could be, turn a profit on, and by building something. Trying to get water. There's water jurisdictions up there in service districts.
Even way up the canyon, there's different
there's all sorts
people
of stuff
pulling water
all over the place. So
Interesting.
yeah, it's a very complex thing. So when the Forest Service tries to convene something, they can only convene it under the guise of the public lands, and you kind of miss the other part of the picture. So the Central Wasatch Commission, we created that, and the Forest Service has been attending it, which is super. And we're lucky that we have a forest supervisor right now that's into that collaboration. But they can't really they're not empowered to do that. And even if they did do it, the state would start like throwing a tantrum, right? Being like, oh, this is the federal government telling us what we need to do, right? So you got to be sensitive to all these different things. But the fact that we have the Central Wasatch Commission I think is really amazing. It seems really wonky, but we have all of these jurisdictions trying to work together on a plan for this place. And so if you want to get involved, love to have you, get involved with us. We want to hear your ideas, but you can also go talk to the Central Wasatch Commission and share your ideas with, more often than not, your elected officials.
Cool.
And because people saying what they're willing to do and not willing to do, people saying, I'm willing to change my behavior to protect this place, or people saying, like, this is all about skiing and I want to get to that chair as fast as I can. I mean, they're all valid perspectives. I might not personally agree with all of those, but, people need to talk. Yeah. And we need to do something, because not doing anything is going to be a disservice not only to us in the next several years, but to future generations.
Yeah, and so in terms of that, what are the best ways people can be proactive until, we don't want to have to get to the point where we're fighting a battle against something that's already has the mechanism in place that nobody really likes. So how can people clearly voice their opinion, or even to be the point to become an activist on this?
I would just say, think about what it is that you value about this landscape, this place, or a particular place within the broader landscape, and come forward with ideas about how you might protect or pursue, that value, with the knowledge that we live in a community, and it's not just me doing what I like to do up there, but there are millions of other people trying to enjoy it. Talk to your elected officials, talk to
like state legislature members.
The state legislature, definitely talk to your legislators, talk to other legislators, talk to people that are the heads of committees, like the environment or transportation committees, depending on where your particular interest lies. Talk to your city council folks. It baffles me how, air quality is like a big issue locally, right? Like, and I feel like the Wasatch in our watershed hasn't quite like reached that critical mass up there. And so honestly, we just need to create conversations. Conversations like you and I just had here today. More people need to be doing it and talking about it and thinking through it, and then taking those ideas and sharing them with leaders. But at the end of the day, we also need to, at some point, stop the planning and put our pencils down, so to speak, and act. Because changes are going to happen, and if we don't put things in place before the changes happen, they're going to happen to us, not with us.
Yeah. Do you have a bunch of information on your website by chance?
Yeah, tons of information on our site about, whether it's transportation or ski area.
SaveOurCanyons.org.
Yeah, SaveOurCanyons.org is the website. We're on Facebook, Instagram. We're moving offices in the next week. We'll be right at the mouth of Big Cottonwood Canyon, right near the Porcupine. So, sweet, swing by and say hello after you're, up there going for a run or bike ride or skiing or just, enjoying the sights.
Sweet. Well, very good. Well, thanks for being on, Carl. Appreciate it.
Appreciate it. Thanks for having me.
You bet.
It's great talking.
Thanks for listening to the Utah Stories program. My name's Richard Markosian. If you want to get involved, you can do so in 3 ways. First of all, we'd love to hear a comment on this story on our YouTube or our website on how you think it would be best to save our canyons and protect and preserve the ecological diversity and still maintain, a lot of people who want to come here as tourists. We'd love to hear from you on that. And also, if you'd like to get more involved in this program, you can do so in 3 ways. First of all, leave us a 5-star review on iTunes. That's very helpful in, of course, if you like the program. You can leave the review if you like the program, but it helps more people know that we are there and available on iTunes. Also, you can share the program with a friend, and you can actually become a member of Utah Stories and Made in Utah by clicking the members button. The cost is $9.99 a month or $99 for the entire year. And for a limited time only, we are offering an awesome advantage to becoming a member now, which is a free VIP ticket to our Made in Utah Festival, which is a $50 value. At our Made in Utah Festival, we'll have about 180 Utah vendors there, making everything from beer to distilled spirits to cheese to wine to products, and it's just a big party with a sound stage, and the VIP area offers samples from restaurants all over Salt Lake City. It's going to be a really awesome event. Visit madeinutahfest.org to learn more about the festival, or visit utahstories.com to learn more about becoming a member. Our production managers are Drew Pecan and Connie Lewis. Thanks for watching. I'll see you next time.